20 years married. Tonight, she learns her mother is Sandro's real wife. The ceremony Mabel remembers, orchestrated, a cover for their actual partnership. Loyalty without honesty is just a prettier cage. The anniversary card was still warm from Mabel's hands when the envelope slid under the restaurant door. No stamp, no return address. Just her name written in block letters so deliberate they looked rehearsed. Mabel Beverly Ricci, like whoever wrote it, wanted to make sure she felt every syllable of a name she'd spent 20 years earning. She should have left it. The private dining room at the old Ricci Social Club kitchen was dressed in candlelight and white roses. The long steel prep tables pushed aside to make space for a dinner table set for two. 40 years of family history lived in those walls. Grease-stained ceilings, saints' portraits, the faint smell of Sunday gravy baked into the plaster. Sandro had chosen this room on purpose. Where we began, he'd said. Where we celebrate. He was in the back corridor, talking low into his phone the way men in his position always did. One hand pressed flat against the wall, voice dropped to a frequency wives learned not to chase. Mabel opened the envelope. Hey, before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome. This channel is where real stories live. Drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing those locations roll in. And if nobody's asked you today how you're doing, I'm asking, how are you doing? Take a breath. You matter. Now, if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the story that will make you want to. Hit that like button. Stay close, because what happens next? Nobody walks away the same. 3 photographs, printed on plain paper, slightly blurred at the edges, like they'd been pulled from old digital files someone thought were buried. Her mother, Celestine Beverly, 71 years old, silver-haired, the woman who had cried the loudest at Mabel's wedding and held her hand through every miscarriage, every mafia wife fear, every 3 a.m. moment of doubt. And Sandro Ricci, with his careful eyes and his careful silences, and the way he always kissed Mabel's forehead, like she was something worth protecting. Together, in a church. Celestine in ivory. Sandro in a dark suit. A priest between them. Signed documents on an altar table, dated. Mabel's eyes caught it, and her breath didn't so much stop as relocate somewhere outside her body. 4 months before Mabel's own wedding day. The 4th photo was worse. It was Mabel's wedding. Her dress, her flowers, her face, radiant and completely unaware, and scrawled in red pen across the bottom. In handwriting she didn't recognize. This one was the cover. Ask him whose name is on the license. The card Mabel had made Sandro. Hand-stitched fabric cover, 20 tiny roses she'd sewn herself over 3 weeks, one for every year, sat open on the table beside the photographs. She'd written inside it, "You are the truest thing in my life." Footsteps in the corridor. Sandro's voice, closer now. She doesn't know. She's never going to know. The question that detonated quietly in Mabel's chest wasn't who is he talking to. It was, how long have I been the last person in the room to know my own life? Mabel didn't move. That was the thing nobody tells you about the moment your world cracks open. You don't collapse. You don't scream. You go very, very still. Like every cell in your body is suddenly in a negotiation with itself about what happens next. She tucked the photographs back into the envelope, folded it once, slid it into her clutch beside her lip balm and her phone like it was a grocery receipt. Her hands didn't shake. That surprised her. 20 years married to a Ricci had apparently trained something cold and functional into her nervous system without her permission. Sandro stepped back into the room, He looked the same as he always did. Composed, broad-shouldered, the kind of handsome that had aged into authority. Silver at his temples. The dark suit he knew she loved. He was carrying 2 glasses of water because he'd noticed years ago that she always forgot to drink at dinner when she was nervous. And he'd made it his quiet habit to remember for her. He noticed things like that. The thought arrived like a blade. Sorry. He set her glass down, touched the back of her chair as he passed. Enzo needed 5 minutes. Is everything handled? Her voice came out level. Practiced. Sandra looked at her. Really looked, the way he did when he was reading a room, and she watched something flicker behind his eyes. Not guilt. Not yet. Something more like vigilance. Everything's fine. He sat, lifted his glass toward her. 20 years, Mabel. She lifted hers. 20 years of what? Exactly. They ordered. She let him talk. About the restoration on the Carmine Street property, about his nephew RAF's new baby, about how this kitchen used to feed 300 people every feast day, and now it was theirs alone for the night. Sandra Ricci could fill a silence like other men filled a room, and usually she loved that about him. Tonight, she was cataloging it, filing it, the way a lawyer preps a case. The red herring arrived in the form of her own memory. 6 months ago, Celestine had borrowed money, $12,000, quietly, through Mabel's personal account. A property thing, darling. Don't mention it to Sandro. Mabel had assumed it was pride. Her mother not wanting to look financially fragile in front of a powerful son-in-law. Now that assumption had teeth. Had Celestine been paid? Was this arrangement financial? Some old country contract her mother had entered before Mabel was even part of the picture? The idea was almost manageable. Almost. Because money could be explained. Money had edges you could trace. What was inside that envelope didn't feel like money. It felt like architecture. Like someone had built her entire life on a foundation she'd never been allowed to inspect. You're quiet, Sandro said. I'm savoring it. She smiled, picked up her fork. 20 years goes fast. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His thumb traced the inside of her wrist the way it always had. That small automatic tenderness that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. Back when she was 26 and too smart for her own good and not nearly smart enough about men like him. I have something for you, he said. He reached into his jacket. Mabel's breath snagged. He set a small velvet box on the table. Not a ring box. Longer. A bracelet, maybe. Or a key. Her mind went somewhere dark and then pulled itself back. She didn't open it. Sandro. Her voice stayed even. A miracle, frankly. Before I open that, I need to ask you something. His hand stilled. And I need you to understand, she continued, that how you answer is going to determine the rest of this evening. The candlelight caught the edge of his jaw. Something in his expression shifted. Not fear, not guilt, but the specific stillness of a man who has spent decades preparing for a conversation he hoped would never come. He knew. Not that she knew. But he knew this moment existed somewhere in the future. He'd been living with the countdown. Ask me, he said quietly. Mabel opened her clutch. Set the envelope on the table between them like a hand of cards. Whose name, she said, is on the marriage license? Part 3. The name. Sandro didn't look at the envelope. He looked at her. That was the tell. A man with nothing to hide looks at the evidence. A man with everything to lose looks at the person holding it. Where did you get that? Low. Careful, the voice he used in rooms where the wrong word cost people futures. It was delivered. Mabel kept her hands flat on the table. Tonight, here, someone knew exactly where we'd be. Something moved through his expression, not the guilt she expected, but something raw, closer to dread. The kind that lives in a man who has been holding a grenade for 20 years and just heard the pin hit the floor. Mabel, the license, Sandro. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. I'm not asking about the photographs. I'm not asking about the church or the date or the priest. I'm asking one question. Whose name is on the legal document that made you a married man? The candles between them burned, without flickering. Somewhere in the back of the kitchen, a pipe knocked against the wall. The old building settling, the way old things do when pressure builds inside them. Celestines, he said. One word. And the entire architecture of Mabel's life shifted 2 inches to the left. Not collapsed, not demolished, just moved. The way a house moves in an earthquake before you understand whether it's going to stand or fall. She'd prepared herself for denial, for anger, for deflection, for the smooth, reaching machinery of misdirection she'd watched him use on enemies and allies for 2 decades. She had not prepared for him to simply tell her, quietly, without flinching. That undid her more than the photographs had. Say the rest, she said. It was 1999. He set his water glass down. Your mother came to my father with a debt, not hers, your grandfather's. Old money, old agreements, the kind that don't go to banks or courts, the kind that get settled in other ways. Mabel felt the red herring slide into place. Financial then, just as she'd suspected. But she held herself still, because Sandro's eyes said there was more, and he was deciding, right now, how much of it she could hold. The marriage was a legal arrangement, a contract. It protected your mother from the debt collectors and gave my family a formal alliance with the Beverly name in this city. He paused. It was never a real marriage, Mabel. We have never. Your mother and I have never. I know what you're about to say. She cut him off. Not because she doubted it. Because she couldn't sit in this candlelit room and hear him explain the boundaries of something she wasn't supposed to know existed. Keep going. My father arranged it. I was 22. I had no more choice in it than Celestine did. His jaw tightened. 2 years later, I met you. 2 years later, I met you. Said like it was the point where the story turned holy. Mabel stood up. Not in rage, in necessity. She needed to be vertical. She needed the physical fact of her own height, her own spine, her own feet on the floor. She walked to the old kitchen window that looked out onto the back alley, the one cooks used to prop open on summer nights, back when this place was alive with people. The glass was fogged from the cold outside. She pressed 2 fingers against it and watched the condensation clear in 2 small circles. 20 years. She had sown 20 roses on that card. 1 per year. She had believed each one. You married me knowing you were already legally married to my mother. Yes. She stood at that altar knowing she was already legally your wife. Yes. And neither of you, her voice caught for the first time, she let it. Not once. Not on a bad night. Not on a good one. Not when I lost the babies. Not when I asked you if there was anything I needed to know. Mabel. His chair scraped back. Don't. She held up one hand without turning around. I'm not finished being in this part yet. He stopped because he knew her. Whatever else he'd done, he knew her. And he understood that right now, the kindest thing he could offer was to stay exactly where he was and let her have the room. The hand-stitched anniversary card sat on the table behind her. 20 small roses, one for every year of something she now had no name for. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. Mum calling. Celeste Ty calling at 8:47 p.m. on the anniversary. As she did every year, without fail, to say happy anniversary, my darling girl. Mabel stared at her mother's name on the screen until it stopped ringing. Then she picked up her clutch, walked past Sandro without touching him, and pushed through the kitchen door into the night. Because before this conversation could go one word further, she needed to find out exactly how much her mother thought she deserved to know. Part 4. Celestine. The alley behind the social club smelled like winter and old stone. Mabel stood under the single amber light above the kitchen door, her breath visible, her coat still inside on the chair where she'd left it, because leaving had felt more urgent than warmth. The cobblestones were slick. Somewhere 2 streets over, a car alarm cycled through its sequence and gave up. She called her mother back. Celestine picked up on the first ring. Of course she did. She always did. That particular maternal hypervigilance that Mabel had spent her whole life reading as devotion. Darling, happy anniversary, my love. How is the evening? Is Sandro? Where are you right now, Mum? A pause. Short, but architectural. The kind of pause that isn't about thinking. It's about deciding. I'm home. Just finished dinner. Why is something... Are you alone? Mabel, you're frightening me. Good. The word came out before she could edit it. Then we're even. Are you alone? Another pause. Longer. And in that silence, Mabel heard 20 years of Sunday phone calls. 20 years of I just want you to be happy. 20 years of Celestine Beverly appearing at every crisis with hot food and perfect timing and eyes that always seemed to hold something just slightly heavier than the moment required. Yes, Celestine said quietly. I'm alone. I'm looking at a photograph of your wedding, Mum. The silence that followed was a completely different species from the ones before it. This one had weight, density, the silence of a woman who has been holding a door shut for 2 decades and just felt the handle turn from the other side. Where did you... It was delivered to me tonight, at my anniversary dinner. Mabel kept her voice clinical. She was a Beverly after all. Celestine herself had taught her that composure was the only armor worth wearing. You're an ivory. There's a priest. There are documents on the altar. The date is 4 months before my wedding. Mabel, Sandro, already confirmed it. She heard her mother's breath change. A sharp, involuntary intake, like someone had pressed a thumb against a bruise. So I'm not calling to verify the facts. I'm calling because I want to hear it from you. Why? The amber light above her flickered once. The car alarm 2 streets over started again. I was going to lose everything. Celestine's voice had dropped to something Mabel had never heard from her before. Not the polished matriarch register, not the warm mother frequency, but something underneath both of those. Something ground level and ashamed. Your grandfather's debts were... Mabel, they were the kind of debts that don't leave you alone. The Ricci family offered a solution, a legal contract, a name on paper that would make certain people stop coming to my door at night. So you married my future husband. I married a document. Firm now. Sandra Ricci and I have never shared a meal alone. We have never... He told me. Mabel pressed her free hand against the cold stone wall. Keep going. 2 years later, you brought him home. Celestine's voice fractured slightly on that sentence, just at the edges, like old porcelain under pressure. You were so alive when you talked about him. I had never seen you look at anyone the way you looked at him, and I thought, You thought what, Mom? I thought I would tell you. I planned to tell you. Before the engagement, I told myself. Before the wedding, I told myself. After the first year, I told myself, when things settle, when the right moment. There were 20 years of right moments. I know. Barely a whisper. I know, darling. Mabel closed her eyes. Behind them, unbidden, came the image of her mother at the wedding. Ivory herself that day, which Mabel had thought was a bold choice for the mother of the bride. But Celestine had laughed and said I refused to wear beige at my age. And Mabel had laughed with her, and the photographer had caught them both mid-laugh. And that photograph sat on Mabel's dressing table at home. Ivory. Because she was the bride. Because in every way that mattered to law and contract, she was. The anonymous tip. Mabel said, "Who sent it?" Silence. Mom. "Who sent the envelope tonight?" "I don't know." But the pause before it arrived 2 seconds too late. Try again. A long exhale. Then there's someone who has known about the arrangement for a long time. Someone who believes you deserve to know years ago and ran out of patience waiting for me to tell you myself. A beat. She did it because she loves you, not to destroy anything. Because she was tired of watching you build a life on ground nobody would let you inspect. She. Who, Mabel said, is she? And Celestine said a name that made Mabel's hand drop from the wall, and her eyes open wide in the cold amber dark. Because it was the name of the woman Mabel had always thought was her closest friend. Part 5. The friend. Midpoint moral lesson. The person who hid the secret is not always the villain. The name Celestine said was Oriana Voss. Mabel stood in the alley and let it land. Oriana, 11 years of friendship, of shared bottles of wine and 2 a.m. phone calls, and the kind of loyalty that felt so solid you stopped checking whether it was real. Oriana, who had been at every anniversary dinner for the last decade. Who sent flowers when Mabel lost the pregnancies? Who had looked Sandro Ricci in the eye at 100 family dinners and smiled like she knew nothing. Except she'd known everything. Mabel ended the call with her mother without saying goodbye. Not cruelly, just because there were no words left that fit the moment, and pulled up Oriana's number. It rang twice. I was wondering how long the alley would take. Oriana said, "You're watching the building." "I'm parked on Carmine Street. I've been here since 7. No apology in her voice. No performance of remorse. Just Oriana. Direct. Undecorated. The way she'd always been when it mattered. I needed to know you were okay. I'm not okay. No. But you're standing. That's the first step." Mabel almost laughed. Didn't. "How long have you known?" 8 years. A beat. "I found the documentation by accident. I was helping your mother sort through old paperwork after she moved apartments. You were in Milan with Sandro, remember? The trip for his cousin's wedding. She'd boxed everything up and asked me to help label it, and I opened the wrong box. 8 years. Oriana had carried this for 8 years and said nothing. And then, tonight of all nights, had decided the silence was over. Why now? Mabel asked. Why the 20th anniversary? Because I watched you spend 3 weeks sewing that card. Oriana's voice finally cracked. Just once. Just briefly. 20 roses, Mabel. 1 for every year. And I thought, if she hands him that card tonight without knowing, I will never forgive myself. You deserve to walk into that room with your eyes open. Mabel looked down at her clutch. The card was still inside. She'd brought it back with her when she left the table. Hand-stitched fabric cover. 20 tiny roses. The words, "You are the truest thing in my life," written in her own hand. She pulled it out, held it in the cold. The roses were imperfect. She was a good seamstress, but not a perfect one. And some of them were slightly uneven, slightly small. She had loved that about it, had thought the imperfections made it more honest. Part 1. Part 5. The card, reappearing, same object, different weight. Oriana. She ran her thumb across the stitching. Do you think he loves me? The question surprised even her. It arrived from somewhere below strategy, below anger, below the cold architectural assessment she'd been running all evening. It was just the question, the one everything else was built around. Oriana was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful and deliberate. The way people speak when they understand that the next sentence will live in someone's memory forever. I think Sandro Ricci has spent 20 years making himself into the husband you deserved. Whether that started as guilt or obligation or something else, I think it became real. I think you made it real. A pause. But what I think doesn't matter. What matters is what you decide to do with tonight. Mabel slid the card back into her clutch. Inside the social club kitchen, through the fogged window, she could see the silhouette of Sandro still at the table. He hadn't moved, hadn't called her phone, hadn't sent anyone after her. He was just sitting in the room where they'd chosen to celebrate, waiting. The velvet box was still on the table. There's something else, Oriana said. Something I didn't put in the envelope because I wasn't sure you needed it tonight. But you do. A breath. The contract between your mother and Sandra's father. There's a dissolution clause. It was built in from the beginning. A 5-year renewable term, administrative only, requiring both parties to sign annually to maintain the legal status. Another breath. Mabel. Neither of them has signed the renewal in 4 years. The cold settled differently on Mabel's skin. What does that mean? It means the legal marriage between Celestine Beverly and Sandro Ricci dissolved quietly, without fanfare, without lawyers, 48 months ago. Oriana, let that breathe. It means that whatever he is to your mother now, contractually, legally, it's nothing. It's been nothing for 4 years. Mabel pressed her back against the cold stone wall and looked up at the slice of winter sky visible between the buildings. 4 years ago, Sandro had taken her to Positano for their 16th anniversary. He'd stood on a terrace above the water and told her she was the only thing in his life he'd never had to negotiate. She hadn't known what he meant. She was beginning to. I need to go back inside, Mabel said. I know. I don't know what I'm going to say. You don't have to know yet. Oriana's voice was quiet and steady. But Mabel, before you go in, the card. Whatever you decide tonight, whatever this becomes, those 20 years were yours. Nobody staged your feelings. Nobody orchestrated what you built inside that marriage. That was real. You were real. Mabel looked at the kitchen window, at Sandro's silhouette, at the candlelight that had been burning for 2 hours now, patient as a kept promise. She pushed off the wall and walked back toward the door. The kitchen door swung shut behind her. Sandro was exactly where she'd left him. Jacket still on, hands folded on the table, the velvet box untouched between the candles, like it had been placed there by someone who understood the weight of timing. He looked up the moment she entered, not with relief, with something quieter. The expression of a man who had spent 40 minutes alone with his own accounting and found the numbers wanting. Mabel sat down. She didn't reach for her water glass, didn't smooth her dress or reposition her silverware or perform any of the small social gestures that usually filled the space between them. She just sat and looked at him and let the silence do its work. The contract dissolved 4 years ago, she said. His eyes didn't widen, didn't dart. Yes, you didn't tell me then either. No, Sandro. She leaned forward slightly. I need you to stop confirming what I already know and start telling me what I don't. Because I have been standing in a cold alley for 40 minutes rebuilding the floor plan of my entire life, and I am tired. So talk to me. All of it, now. He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, but gathering. She recognized the difference after 20 years. When Sandro Ricci went silent to deflect, his jaw set and his eyes moved left. When he went silent to prepare, he looked directly at her, and his hands opened slightly on the table, like a man laying down something he'd been carrying too long. His hands were open. My father arranged the contract without telling me the full terms, he began. I knew Celestine Beverly. I knew the family name. I knew there was a legal arrangement. I thought it was a business alliance, a paper structure, nothing more. I was 22, and I did what my father told me because that was what you did. He paused. When I met you, I went to my father immediately. I told him I wanted to dissolve it. He told me it wasn't that simple, that breaking the contract early would reopen the debt question for Celestine, that the Beverly name would be exposed to the collectors again. So he used my mother as leverage to keep you in it. Yes. No decoration on the word. Just the bare fact, offered like evidence. For years, I paid the original debt down privately. Money that never touched Celestine, never touched you, routed through the family accounts as operational expense. By the time the balance cleared, the contract's own dissolution clause had activated. I didn't need to break it. I just needed to stop renewing it. And 4 years ago, you stopped. 4 years ago, I stopped. His eyes held hers. I spent 2 years after that trying to figure out how to tell you. Every time I rehearsed it, I understood that the telling would devastate you, and I kept thinking there was a version where I found the right words. His voice dropped. There weren't. There aren't. There's only the truth and the damage and the hoping you're strong enough to hold both. Mabel looked at the velvet box. Open it, she said. He reached forward and lifted it. Set it in front of her. She pulled it toward herself and flipped the latch. Inside, on a bed of dark silk, was a ring. Not a replacement engagement ring. She still wore the original, had worn it every day for 20 years without question. This was different. A wider band, platinum, with a single engraving on the inner face. She lifted it and tilted it toward the candlelight. By choice. 2 words, a date beneath them. Today's date. I had a lawyer draw up our marriage license 6 months ago, Sandro said. A real one. Ours. Just yours and mine. He paused. I was going to ask you tonight if you would marry me again. Properly, legally, knowing everything. Another pause. Heavier. I was going to tell you everything tonight, Mabel. The envelope just took the order of it away from me. She turned the ring in her fingers. The engraving caught the light in small, precise flashes. By choice. You were going to tell me. Tonight? I had pages. A rueful, broken, almost smile. I had an actual written speech. Enzo made me rehearse it. Despite everything, despite the photographs and the alley and the cold and Celestine and Oriana and the entire structural demolition of her evening, Mabel felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the first molecule of something that could, given time and truth, become it. Where are the pages? She asked. He reached into his jacket, produced a folded sheet of paper, slightly crumpled, the edges soft from being handled too many times. She took it. Read it. He watched her read it in silence, and she let him watch. Because after 20 years, he had earned at least the right to see her face when she encountered the truth of what he felt. even if that truth was arriving 6 months too soon and 20 years too late and in entirely the wrong order. When she finished, she folded it carefully and placed it beside the hand-stitched card on the table. 2 documents, both about the same man. One she had made, one he had made. "I need to see my mother," she said. "I know. Tonight. I'll drive you." "No." She stood, picked up the ring box, closed it, placed it in her clutch beside the card. Not accepting, not refusing, holding. "I need to do that alone. And then I need to sleep somewhere that isn't our house. And I need 3 days where you don't call me unless someone is dying." She looked at him steadily. "And then I need to come back here, to this room, and finish this conversation." Sandro stood, and in that moment, standing across a candlelit table in the kitchen, where his family had fed a neighborhood for 40 years, he looked less like the powerful man she'd spent 2 decades beside and more like the 24-year-old who had first made her laugh. Uncertain, exposed, hoping the next moment would be kind. "I'll be here," he said. Celestine Beverly lived 12 minutes from the social club in a narrow townhouse on Feltham Street that smelled permanently of bergamot tea and old books. Mabel had a key, had always had a key. Her mother had pressed it into her hand on her wedding day, so you always have somewhere to come back to, and Mabel had carried it on her keyring for 20 years without examining what that offer had really meant. She let herself in without knocking. Celestine was in the sitting room, not pretending to read, not performing calm, just sitting in her armchair in the lamplight with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the door because she'd known Mabel was coming the moment the phone call ended. A pot of bergamot tea sat on the side table. 2 cups? She'd prepared 2 cups. That detail nearly broke Mabel open in a way the photographs hadn't. She sat on the sofa across from her mother and looked at her. Really looked, the way you look at someone when you're trying to reconcile 2 versions of them into one person. Celestine Beverly, at 71, was still striking. Silver hair pinned back. Good bones. The kind of posture that came from decades of refusing to let the world see her fold. She had Mabel's eyes, or Mabel had hers. The same precise, watchful dark brown that missed very little and forgave even less. Except Celestine had forgiven herself something enormous. For 20 years. "Pour the tea," Mabel said. Celestine poured. Her hands were steady. Mabel noted that and filed it, not as coldness, but as the particular steadiness of someone who has rehearsed this moment in their mind so many times that the actual arrival of it feels almost familiar. "You knew he was going to tell me tonight," Mabel said. Celestine wrapped both hands around her cup. "He told me 6 months ago that he intended to. He asked my permission, which I found," she paused, "complicated, since it wasn't his secret to hold alone. He asked your permission to tell me the truth about my own marriage." "Yes. And you said—" "I said it was long overdue." Celestine's voice was quiet, but undeflecting. "I said I should have been the one to tell you years ago, and that I was a coward, and that if he was brave enough to do it, I wouldn't stand in the way." Mabel set her cup down. "Then why didn't you, years ago? Pick a year, any year in the last 20. Why didn't you sit me down and tell me?" Celestine was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car passed on Feltham Street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. "Because every year that passed made it worse," she said finally. "In the beginning, I told myself you were too new to the relationship. I didn't want to poison something that might not last. Then you were engaged, and I thought, after the wedding, when she settled, then you lost the first pregnancy, and I thought, not now, she's grieving. Then the second, and I thought, she cannot carry this too. And then 5 years became 10, and 10 became 15, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, Her voice finally fractured genuinely at the seams. Somewhere I stopped planning to tell you and started just living with not telling you. And that is the most shameful thing I have ever done. The lamplight sat between them, warm and unhelpful. Did you love him? Mabel asked. At any point. Ever. No. Immediate. Absolute. Sandro Ricci was a transaction that saved my life and trapped my daughters. There has never been a single moment of anything else. She looked directly at Mabel. What I love is you. What I've always loved is you. And I know that sounds like the least adequate thing a person could say right now. It is, Mabel said. It's completely inadequate. Yes, and I believe you. The words arrived before Mabel had consciously decided to say them. But once out, they felt accurate. Not generous, just accurate. That's what makes it so hard. You weren't malicious. You were just a coward, like you said. And I don't know what to do with a coward I love. Celestine closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were wet. Not spilling over, just full, the way eyes get when a person is holding grief at the very threshold of their face. You don't have to do anything with me tonight, she said. Or this week. Or this year. I will be here. I will answer every question you ever think of at 3 a.m. I will sit in whatever discomfort you need me to sit in for however long it takes. A beat. I am not going anywhere. I have nowhere to go that matters more than being accountable to you. Mabel reached into her clutch. She pulled out the hand-stitched anniversary card and set it on the coffee table between them. Celestine looked at it. At the 20 imperfect roses, the fabric cover, the visible hours of care in every stitch, and her expression cracked fully, finally, all the way through. I made this for a marriage I didn't know wasn't legal, Mabel said. And I need you to understand something, Mum. These 20 roses, every single one of them was real. My feelings were real. My years were real. What I built was real, even if the foundation was rotten. And nobody, not you, not Sandro, not whoever your father owed money to in 1999, gets to take that from me. Celestine nodded. Couldn't speak. I'm staying here tonight. Mabel said, in my old room. And tomorrow morning you're going to make me tea and eggs and you're going to start at the very beginning. 1999, your father's debt, the Ricci name, all of it. And you're not going to edit a single word. All right, Celestine whispered. And, Mum? Yes, don't touch the card. She left it on the table between them like a marker. Proof that something real had existed, even inside a lie. Then she picked up her clutch, walked down the hallway she'd known since childhood, and climbed the stairs to the room where she had once been just a daughter, before she was anyone's wife. The first day, Mabel slept. Not the collapsed, grief-exhausted sleep she'd expected, but long, flat, dreamless hours that felt less like rest and more like her body pressing pause on everything it didn't yet know how to process. She woke at noon to the smell of bergamot tea and the sound of Celestine moving quietly in the kitchen below, doing dishes with the particular careful gentleness of someone trying to take up as little space as possible. She lay in her childhood ceiling and counted the hairline cracks she'd memorized at 16. They hadn't changed. Some things didn't. Her phone had 11 messages. 3 from Oriana. 1 from Sandro's nephew, RAF, who clearly knew nothing and was just sending anniversary congratulations with an embarrassing number of champagne emojis. 1 from Sandro, sent at 2 a.m., which meant he hadn't slept either. She read his message once. I'm not going to fill your silence with words. I just want you to know the lights are on. She put the phone face down and went downstairs for tea. The second day, Celestine talked. All of it. 1999, her father Augusto Beverly's gambling debts, The Ricci family's quiet empire of favors and obligations. The contract drawn up in a notary's back office on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 witnesses and no celebration. Celestine had worn a gray dress. There had been no flowers. Sandro had shaken her hand afterward and said, in the flat tone of a young man doing his father's bidding, "I'll make sure you're protected." He had. Quietly, consistently, without asking for anything in return, for 20 years. "He's a complicated man," Celestine said over the kitchen table, "but he has never been a cruel one." Mabel listened to all of it without interrupting. She asked questions, precise, forensic questions, the kind that left no room for vagueness, and Celestine answered every one. By the time the light changed from afternoon gold to early evening gray, Mabel had the complete picture. Every year, every decision, every moment someone had chosen silence over her. She also had something she hadn't expected. Context, not absolution. Not yet. But the understanding that the architecture of this secret had been built by frightened people, making small bad choices that accumulated over time into something enormous. Her mother hadn't set out to betray her. Sandro hadn't set out to deceive her. They had both set out to protect something and had protected the wrong thing. The secret instead of the person. The person who hid the secret is not always the villain. The thought arrived quietly, without fanfare. She didn't announce it. She just let it sit in the room with her, taking up the space it needed. The third day, Mabel walked, alone, through the neighborhood she'd grown up in, past the bakery that had changed owners 4 times, but somehow always smelled the same, past the school where she'd learned to read, past the church where her grandmother's funeral had been held, and where, she now knew, no wedding ceremony involving her name had ever been legally registered. She stopped outside that church for a long time. Her wedding day had been real. The dress, the flowers, the vows, the photographs, the way Sandro had looked at her when she came down the aisle, all of it had been real, even if the license in the filing cabinet at home had never been valid. She had loved genuinely. She had been loved genuinely. The ceremony had been staged as a cover, but somewhere inside it, between the choreography and the obligation, something true had taken root and grown for 20 years without anyone planting it on purpose. She pulled out the velvet box, opened it in the thin winter sunlight. By choice. He had commissioned this 6 months ago. He had paid a lawyer. He had rehearsed a speech with his nephew. He had chosen, deliberately, soberly, with full knowledge of what the truth would cost, to ask her again, not to maintain the cover, not to protect the family name, but because after 20 years of a marriage that had started as someone else's arrangement, he wanted one that was unambiguously, legally, irreversibly his choice. She closed the box, took out her phone, called Oriana first, because Oriana had blown up her life out of love and deserved to know she was still standing. They talked for 40 minutes. Oriana cried. Mabel didn't, which surprised them both. "You're going back to him," Oriana said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going back to the conversation," Mabel said. "That's all I'm committing to right now. That's enough. It's all I have." "Mabel," Oriana's voice softened. "It's more than most people manage." She called Sandro at 4 p.m. He picked up before the first ring finished, which meant he'd been holding his phone, which meant the composed, controlled man she'd spent 2 decades beside had spent 3 days being quietly undone, and something about that mattered to her more than she'd expected. "The social club kitchen," she said. "Tonight, 8 o'clock. A pause. I'll be there. Bring the lawyer's paperwork." Another pause. Shorter, warmer. "It's already in my jacket." Of course it is. Despite everything, despite all of it, She felt the faintest edge of something that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. Sandro, yes. The lights being on. She looked up at the winter sky above the church. I saw it. I just needed 3 days before I could walk toward them. She heard him exhale. A long, slow release, like a man setting down something extraordinarily heavy. Take whatever time you need, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She hung up, stood outside the church for another minute. Then she turned and started walking, not home, not to Celestine's, but forward, in the direction of whatever came next. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing the future over the wound. The social club kitchen looked exactly the same. Same candlelight, same white roses, same saints' portraits on the grease-stained walls, same smell of Sunday gravy baked into 40 years of plaster. Sandro had reset the table. Fresh candles, fresh water, the same 2 place settings, as if the evening had simply paused 3 days ago and was willing to resume without judgment. He was standing when she walked in, not posed, not performing composure, just standing, jacket on, hands at his sides, the velvet box and a folded legal document on the table beside the candles. He looked like a man who had spent 72 hours deciding exactly nothing, because there was nothing left to decide on his end. The deciding was hers. Mabel set her clutch on the table, pulled out the hand-stitched anniversary card, placed it between them. 20 imperfect roses, 1 for every year. The words inside still read, "You are the truest thing in my life." And standing here now, knowing everything, she found that the sentence hadn't become a lie. It had just become more complicated than she'd known when she wrote it. Complicated wasn't the same as false. I have conditions, she said. Sandro nodded once. Tell me. Oriana Voss gets a formal apology from you. In person. She blew up her friendship with me to make sure I knew the truth. And whatever you think about how she did it because she loved me when the 2 people who should have were too afraid. She held his gaze. She deserves acknowledgement. Done. My mother and I are going to need time. Real time. Not Sunday dinners pretending everything is fine. She and I have work to do, and you don't get to manage the pace of that. I know. And Sandro. She took 1 step closer to the table. If there is anything, still filed in a drawer somewhere, still living in a lawyer's office, still breathing in the background of our life that I don't know about, now, tonight, all of it. He was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he reached into his jacket and produced not 1 document, but 2. Set them both on the table. The first was the new marriage license. Their names, today's date, clean and legal, and waiting for signatures. The second was a thinner document, older, paper. A property deed, she saw, for a house in Positano. The terrace above the water where he'd told her she was the only thing in his life he'd never had to negotiate. Registered solely in her name. Filed 4 years ago. The same month the contract with Celestine had dissolved. She looked up at him. I didn't know how to give it to you without explaining everything, he said quietly. So I held it. It's yours. It's been yours for 4 years. Whatever you decide tonight, that doesn't change. Mabel picked up the deed. Read it. Set it down. Then she picked up the new marriage license. The language was straightforward. Legal, clean, precise. 2 names. 1 date. Space for 2 signatures. And a witness. At the bottom, in the margin in Sandro's handwriting, not typed, handwritten, slightly uneven, were 4 words that weren't part of any legal template. Still you. Always you. She thought about the 22-year-old who had shaken her mother's hand in a notary's office and said, "I'll make sure you're protected." The 24-year-old who had made her laugh at a party and looked at her like she was a problem he hadn't anticipated and was enormously grateful for. The man who had noticed she forgot to drink water at dinner and had quietly corrected for it for 20 years without ever making her feel managed. She thought about 3 days ago. The cold alley, the amber light, the envelope, the photographs. The way the floor had moved 2 inches to the left and somehow hadn't swallowed her. She thought about what Oriana had said. Those 20 years were yours. Nobody staged your feelings. And she thought about the ring inscription. By choice, not by contract, not by obligation, not by a debt her grandfather owed to a family in 1999. By the specific, deliberate, eyes-open choice of 2 people who had arrived at this table through the wreckage of a secret and were still, somehow, here. She reached into her clutch one final time. Not for the ring box. He was holding that. For a pen. She signed the license, slid it across the table, held the pen out to him. He took it, signed. His handwriting was steadier than she expected. And then she realized it wasn't steadiness. It was relief. The particular physical release of a man who has been holding his breath for 20 years finally exhaling. Sandro opened the velvet box. She held out her right hand. Not her left, not yet. Not the hand that wore the ring from the first ceremony. Her right hand. New. Uncumbered. He understood immediately. She saw it in his eyes, and he slid the band onto her right hand without ceremony or instruction, because after 20 years, he knew her well enough to read what she meant without translation. By choice. S. The engraving pressed warm against her skin. "I have one question," she said. "Ask me." Positano. The 16th anniversary. You stood on that terrace and told me I was the only thing in your life you'd never had to negotiate. She looked at him steadily. You'd already filed the deed. You already knew the contract was dissolving. What were you trying to say? Sandro looked at her for a long moment. In the candlelight, in this kitchen that smelled of 40 years of family and Sunday gravy, he looked neither powerful nor composed nor careful. He looked like a man who had loved someone longer than he'd deserved to, and knew it. I was trying to say that everything else in my life came with conditions, he said. My name, my family, my position, every relationship I'd ever had. All of it had fine print, terms, obligations. He paused. And then there was you. And you were just you. No contract, no clause. Just a person I wanted to be better for. He paused again. I was trying to say that you were the first real thing I ever chose. The candles burned between them, steady and unhurried. Mabel picked up the hand-stitched anniversary card. 20 imperfect roses, one for every year, and placed it in his hands, not as a gift, not as a surrender, as a record. Proof that inside the lie, something true had been quietly growing all along. We're going to need a real ceremony, she said. The almost smile she hadn't seen in 3 days crossed his face. Careful, uncertain, and completely genuine. Oriana will want to plan it, he said. Oriana will plan it. She's earned it. Mabel picked up her water glass. And Celestine is coming. She's going to sit in the front row, and she's going to cry, and I'm going to let her because she's still my mother, and that's the most complicated true thing I know. She raised her glass. After a moment, he raised his. 20 years, she said. And now we start. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing the future over the wound. The bravest thing Mabel Beverly did wasn't surviving the truth. It was deciding that the truth, however late it arrived, was still worth building on. The hand-stitched card sat on the table between 2 signed documents and a velvet box. 20 imperfect roses. The candles burned all the way down. And in the old social club kitchen, where 3 generations of one family had fed a neighborhood and kept its secrets, 2 people finished the anniversary dinner they had started, slowly, quietly, and entirely by choice. Thank you so much for sticking around and showing me so much love and support. You have no idea how much it means to me. If this story resonated with you, then hit that subscribe and like button right now.